I can finally start my life over. The moment my notarized signature was placed on our divorce settlement, my husband spoke those words in a bright, cheerful voice. On the living room coffee table sat the legal documents with both our signatures and a single, worn-out medication logbook placed quietly to the side. Sitting next to my husband was a young woman wearing a bright sundress, Chloe, the woman my husband had chosen as his new life partner. She flashed a glamorous smile and gave me a slight nod, her tone dripping with condescension. "You have worked so hard for so long. Take a rest. I will be the one supporting him from now on." I did not yell. I did not scream in tears, nor did I attack her. I simply stared quietly at the old medication logbook in the center of the table. "You have worked so hard for so long." The two people sitting across from me had absolutely no idea how shallow and completely detached from reality those words were. Harrison looked down at the divorce papers with a satisfied smirk. His complexion was good, and he certainly did not look like a man suffering from a severe, incurable chronic illness. True to his former title as vice president of sales, he still dressed immaculately and wore an expression full of unwavering confidence. That aura of an affluent, successful older man was likely exactly what Chloe had fallen for. "You can finally be free from nursing me," Harrison said, acting as if he were a deeply compassionate man. "I am perfectly fine now. With Chloe here, I can easily get through the rest of my treatments." Hearing those words, my fingertips went ice cold for a brief second. He can easily get through it. Harrison genuinely believed that he had been fighting his disease all by himself. For 22 years, I had spun an invisible web throughout this house just to keep his life tethered to this world. Morning, noon, evening, and right before bed. Calculating the exact timing for different types of medications to prevent severe side effects. Never missing the subtle signs of a midnight flare-up. Rubbing his back while simultaneously making the critical judgment of whether or not to call 911. Working a grueling schedule as a registered nurse at a major metropolitan hospital while spending hours every year updating complex insurance, prior authorizations, and financial assistance paperwork. I carried all of that weight alone. Yet, Harrison never once thanked me. "Nursing your husband is a wife's duty. You are an RN anyway. You are used to this sort of thing, right?" That was the phrase he threw at me year after year. I picked up my purse and stood up. I did not demand alimony. I did not fight over the division of assets. I simply pointed at the medication logbook I had left on the table. "Just make sure you bring that to your next doctor's appointment." Harrison scoffed. "Chloe will take care of all that." Chloe nodded enthusiastically and gently touched his arm. "Yes, I will manage everything perfectly. Do not worry about a thing." I did not say another word. I just quietly turned my back to them. My steps toward the front door felt miraculously light. From behind me, I could hear their joyful laughter. It was the giddy sound of two people completely intoxicated by the expectation of a shiny new life. When I opened the front door, the cool evening breeze brushed against my cheeks. The moment the door clicked shut, I felt the suffocating, heavy air that had bound me for 22 years instantly dissipate. Walking toward the subway station, I pulled out my smartphone. I opened my contacts and tapped the familiar number of the university hospital. After a few rings, the female receptionist answered. "I am calling regarding the emergency contact and proxy registration for Harrison Miller," I said. My voice clear and unwavering as I stopped to look at the city skyline bathed in the sunset. Effective immediately, I am terminating my status as his registered family member and medical proxy. Please direct all future emergency notifications and treatment consent forms to someone else. I could hear the receptionist sharply inhale on the other end of the line. Revoking a medical proxy is not a simple clerical update. In the treatment of a complex, intractable disease, it means completely severing the vital pipeline between the physician and the patient. Understood. I will inform his attending physician, Dr. Sterling, right away. I hung up and let out a deep exhale. Harrison still did not know. He had no idea what a terrifying safety net he had just discarded. The medication schedules, the clinic dates, the emergency protocols. His daily life had only functioned so smoothly because I was behind the scenes doing all the dirty work, adjusting everything, and meticulously keeping records. In 3 days, Harrison would take his mistress to his regular monthly checkup. The moment he sat in the exam room chair, he would realize the horrifying truth. The freedom he thought he had won was, in reality, the act of slicing his own lifeline. Pulling a single suitcase, I climbed the stairs of an older apartment complex. It was a modest off-campus apartment where my daughter, Harper, lived alone while attending college. When I rang the doorbell, the door immediately opened, revealing my daughter's worried face. "Mom." Harper looked at me and did not ask any questions. She silently took my luggage and ushered me inside. It was a small space, but it smelled warm and inviting. The moment I felt the air in her apartment, the heavy burden I had carried on my shoulders for 22 years finally slid off. Sitting across from my daughter, who had brewed me a cup of hot chamomile tea, I wrapped both my hands around the mug. The gentle heat transferred to my freezing fingertips. I tried to remember the last time someone had made a cup of tea just for me. For 22 years, my entire concept of time revolved exclusively around my husband's survival. Inside my bag was an old blue binder. It was different from the logbook I had left on the living room table with the divorce papers. This was my personal copy of his medical records. Without thinking, I pulled the binder out. As I turned the pages, my own cramped handwriting jumped out at me. Dates, times, body temperature, blood pressure, types and dosages of medications, and minute changes in his physical condition. Slightly breathless in the middle of the night. Must confirm with Dr. Sterling at tomorrow's appointment. Tremors in the right hand are worse than yesterday. Possible side effect of the new medication. Further reduce sodium in his diet. He hates it, so disguise the lack of salt with a heavy herbal broth. These were not just notes. It was a literal map of life that I had painstakingly stitched together, fraying my own nerves, just so my husband could wake up safely and breathe normally the next day. Harrison genuinely believes he is a strong, independent man, an attractive, successful executive who refuses to be beaten by an illness and is loved by a beautiful young woman. But the only reason he could maintain that facade was because I stayed up listening to his breathing patterns, neutralizing the signs of a flare-up before they happened, and coordinating with his doctors behind the scenes. Why did I endure such unreasonable treatment for so long? Because I did not want to rob my daughter of a father figure. And there was one other reason. A promise I had made to his mother when she was severely ill in her hospital bed shortly after we got married. He is so proud and clumsy, but please, do not ever abandon him. Bound by the words of my ailing mother-in-law holding my hand, I had made a firm resolution to support him until the bitter end, both as his wife and as a medical professional. But the moment that resolve completely shattered came quite suddenly. It happened 6 months ago. Harrison complained of severe dizziness and nausea, and I drove him to the emergency room in the middle of the night. After sitting by his side through a 4-hour IV drip, I was driving us back, worrying about how this would affect my upcoming night shift. Harrison was lounging in the passenger seat when his smartphone rang. The screen displayed the name Chloe. Without showing an ounce of concern for me, he answered the phone in a bright, upbeat voice. "Oh, I just got a little tired and had a dizzy spell. I am a strong guy. I would never let an illness beat me. Let us go to that French bistro you wanted to try." Laughing happily, his profile showed no trace of the shadow of a deadly disease. And after he hung up, he did not offer a single word of gratitude to me, the woman who had stayed up all night by his side and was currently driving him home. In that exact moment, something inside me quietly, yet completely, crumbled to dust. This man does not see me as his wife. He does not even see me as a human being who feels pain or exhaustion. He only views me as a convenient medical device designed to keep him alive. Mom. Harper's voice snapped me back to reality. Harper stared at the blue binder in my hands and spoke quietly but firmly. "You do not have to throw your life away for Dad anymore." Her words were almost chillingly straightforward. Dad has absolutely no idea how much he is being protected. He needs to realize it, and he will only realize it once you are gone. In my daughter's eyes, I saw a mixture of quiet rage toward her father's vanity and deep compassion for me. I could not say anything. I just squeezed the teacup a little tighter. Someone had finally seen me. Someone who knew how long and lonely my battle had been was sitting right here. That night, in Harper's apartment, I fell asleep without setting a single alarm clock for the first time in 22 years. I did not have to jolt awake in terror at the sound of my husband tossing in his sleep. I did not have to strain my ears for the urgings of a respiratory attack. I had completely forgotten how incredibly luxurious and comforting pure silence could be. When I woke up the next morning to the sunlight streaming through the window, there was not a single missed call from Harrison on my smartphone. He still had not noticed. He had no idea that in the house I had abandoned, the specific packets of pills he needed to take that morning were not neatly laid out on the table. He had no idea what combination of drugs he was even supposed to be taking. And above all else, He had no idea what a fatal situation he was about to walk into at his monthly cleansing. The hands of the clock ticked quietly forward. The moment he would learn the truth was rapidly approaching. It was 7:30 a.m. My body was still listening for phantom alarms. This was my first morning as a divorced woman in my daughter's apartment. Usually, this hour was a battlefield. Taking Harrison's blood pressure and temperature, calculating the exact sodium content of his breakfast, and preparing 5 different types of pills that had to be administered within 30 minutes after he ate. If I was even slightly late, he would become irritable and click his tongue at my incompetence. That was my life for 22 years. But right now, all that sat in front of me was a piece of toast and a warm cup of coffee my daughter had made. I did not hear the sound of foil pill blister packs popping. I did not hear my husband clicking his tongue. There was only the quiet, gentle morning light washing over the small dining table. "Sleep well, Mom?" Harper asked, leaning forward from across the table. I nodded slowly, wrapping both hands around my coffee mug. Yes. I cannot remember the last time I woke up to a morning this quiet. Harper smiled happily and started eating her breakfast. That peaceful atmosphere was broken by the modest ringing of my smartphone. The screen displayed a familiar, local number. It was the specialty pharmacy located right across from the university hospital, the one that had handled my husband's prescriptions for years. I hesitated for a moment, then quietly stood up, walked to the window, and answered the call. "Hello. This is Evelyn." "Oh, Evelyn? I am so sorry to call this early. It is Joanne from the pharmacy." The voice on the other end belonged to Joanne Miller, a veteran pharmacist who sounded anxious. She was one of the very few people who truly understood the complexity of my husband's drug regimen and had helped me manage it all these years. Actually, first thing this morning, a young woman came in claiming to be Harrison's proxy to pick up his medications. Hearing those words, I instinctively closed my eyes. Chloe, my husband's new partner, had already started playing the role of his devoted nurse, but she did not have his medication logbook. Worse than that, she knew absolutely nothing about the dosage changes Dr. Sterling made last week. Joanne's voice leaked clear confusion and a professional sense of dread. When I tried to explain the medication warnings, the woman just laughed and interrupted me. Joanne hesitated, sounding incredibly uncomfortable. She said, "My husband is almost fully cured, so I was told these are basically just like vitamin supplements." A freezing wind blew through my chest. Vitamin supplements. What my husband took every single day were specialized, heavy-duty suppressants that carried severe side effects. One wrong move could trigger a life-threatening medical crisis. That was exactly why I had fried my nerves keeping meticulous daily records in my notebook. Harrison had been lying to Chloe. He told her he was a strong man who was on the verge of regaining perfect health. Just to look cool in front of his younger mistress, he had completely hidden the severity of his incurable disease, playing it off as minor fatigue, and Chloe had blindly swallowed every lie built inside that house. Evelyn, this is incredibly dangerous. Given Harrison's current lab numbers, leaving his medication management to someone who takes it this lightly is, Joanne's voice trembled slightly. It was the genuine terror of a healthcare professional watching a patient let go of their lifeline. Looking out at the city skyline, I spoke quietly but firmly. "Joanne, actually, Harrison and I finalized our divorce yesterday." I heard Joanne gasp on the other end of the line. A long silence followed. "I am no longer his wife. And yesterday, I officially instructed the hospital to remove me from his medical proxy and emergency contact list." I paused, suppressing my emotions, and continued. "He will most likely go to his regular appointment tomorrow afternoon with that woman. From now on, please direct all medication counseling and side effect warnings to him and his new partner." Joanne could not speak for a long moment. She knew me. She knew I was always the first one through the pharmacy doors every month. She knew that before she even had to explain anything, I would accurately tell her, "His midnight palpitations increased this month, so the doctor lowered this specific dosage." She was the one person who had a front row seat to the 22 years of grueling labor I endured behind the scenes to keep my husband alive. "I see." When Joanne finally squeezed the words out, her voice sounded thick with emotion. "Evelyn, considering how meticulously you kept those records and how much you helped us ensure his safety, Harrison truly has no idea what was protecting him all this time, does he?" That single sentence resonated warmly in my chest. My efforts, which had never been thanked and were always dismissed as my basic duty, were genuinely recognized by a medical expert. That alone felt like salvation. "I understand completely. I will delete your contact information from Harrison's file immediately. Moving forward, I will be strictly instructing the patient directly. Evelyn, you have truly worked so hard for so long. Please get some rest. It was not the shallow, condescending phrase Chloe had used. It was a sincere, heartfelt acknowledgement from the bottom of her heart. I bowed my head as if she were standing right in front of me. Thank you, I replied simply, and hung up the phone. When I returned to the living room, Harper was looking at me with concern. I gave her a small smile and took a sip of my lukewarm coffee. Beneath the bitterness, I tasted absolute relief. Harrison still did not realize the true horror his lies had invited. I did not know how Chloe reported back to him after failing to pick up the medication. Maybe they just laughed it off. They told me I could not get it without the logbook. How weird is that? Tomorrow was finally the day of his monthly checkup. His attending physician, Dr. Sterling, was a strict man who only looked at data and facts. Harrison's vanity and Chloe's ignorance would hold zero weight in that examination room. Up until now, I had carefully chosen my words to protect Harrison's pride, casually conveying his true symptoms to Dr. Sterling without bruising his ego. The atmosphere in that exam room had only remained peaceful because of the blue binder I meticulously maintained. Tomorrow, sitting in that chair without me, Harrison would face the reality that he could not answer a single medical question on his own. The moment the illusion of the strong, independent man he built came crashing down was right around the corner. The afternoon in my daughter's apartment was unbelievably quiet. I sat at the small living room table, sorting through the few documents I had brought with me. Slipped among them was an old photocopy. It was last year's application receipt for the copay assistance program and insurance prior authorization. The moment I saw it, my fingertips stopped moving. Harrison's disease required astronomical specialty treatments to slow its progression. If we did not utilize these assistance programs and massive insurance overrides, the monthly medical bills would have crushed our household finances in an instant. That is exactly why, around this time every year, I adjusted my work schedule and ran myself ragged between government offices, insurance brokers, and the hospital billing department. Tax returns, proof of household residency, clinical evaluation forms signed by his primary physician, health insurance coverage proofs, gathering every single piece of paper without missing a single detail and submitting them to the state health department before the deadline. It was never an easy task. Harrison did not even know this process existed. My old company's health insurance is top tier, so everything gets covered for cheap. He genuinely believed that. He could not even fathom me dragging my exhausted body straight from a night shift, waiting in endless lines at the county clerk's office, walking for miles in the blazing sun to fetch missing paperwork. To him, his low medical bills were simply proof that he was an elite, socially protected man. He never once considered it the result of his wife's desperate, sweaty labor. As I was reminiscing about the past and preparing to throw the photocopy into the trash, my smartphone vibrated quietly again. The screen displayed the main number for the university hospital. The caller was the medical social worker, Miss Ramirez. Evelyn, I am so sorry to bother you when you are busy. It is Ramirez from Social Services. Her voice lacked its usual calm tone. It was clearly laced with confusion and tension. She was the hero who had helped me navigate his home care systems and financial assistance applications all these years. She knew how exhausted I was trying to balance his care with my job, and she was the kind soul who constantly told me, "Please, you need to rest." I just received a notification from the main reception desk. They said you removed yourself as his registered family member. Ramirez chose her words very carefully. Could you tell me what is going on? The deadline for his patient assistance program renewal is next week. I completely assumed you would be coming in to pick up the paperwork this year as usual. I took a deep breath and stared at the blue sky outside the window. Miss Ramirez, thank you so much for everything you have always done for us. Actually, my divorce from Harrison was finalized yesterday. I heard Ramirez gasp over the line. Therefore, I cannot submit the renewal documents this year. Please direct all future administrative procedures to the patient himself or his new partner. Ramirez was at a loss for words for a while. As a medical social worker, she understood exactly what this situation meant better than anyone else. Evelyn, does Harrison understand what he has to do on his own? Ramirez's voice trembled slightly. The renewal deadline is only a few days away. If he misses this, his medical expenses starting next month will default to his full deductible and out-of-pocket maximum. Above all else, I cannot possibly imagine Harrison gathering those complex documents all by himself. I shook my head quietly. I knew Ramirez could not see me, but I could not help it. He told me that nursing him was my basic duty. He also told me that he did not need me anymore because his new partner would support him from now on. My voice sounded surprisingly cold and clear, even to my own ears. So, I simply did exactly what he asked. A heavy silence fell over the phone. She knew exactly how much of his heartless abuse I had endured, and how desperately I had run myself into the ground to protect his life anyway. I understand, Ramirez finally said, her voice quiet but filled with strong resolve. If you have made your decision, Evelyn, I have absolutely no right to stop you. You have sacrificed pieces of your own soul to support that man all these years. Please let me say, from the bottom of my heart, you have done more than enough. With those words, the cold knot that had formed deep in my chest melted away just a little more. Thank you. You truly saved me so many times, Miss Ramirez. I will be sitting in on his regular checkup tomorrow. Doctor, Sterling and I will work together to make sure the patient fully understands the severe reality of his situation. You do not need to worry about this anymore, Evelyn. Pushed forward by Ramirez's reassuring words, I hung up the phone. I took the copy of the renewal application in my hand and slowly tore it down the middle. The sound of tearing paper echoed like a blade, cutting away my lingering attachments to the past. My days of bowing my head and begging for the sake of another person's life were finally over. Around the same time, my ex-husband Harrison was sitting in the living room of his upscale downtown condo, his arms crossed in a foul mood. On the table sat a bottle of over-the-counter multivitamin gummies Chloe had bought to replace the prescription meds she failed to pick up. That pharmacy was so rude. They said they could not give me anything without the logbook, and they told me to check with his wife, Chloe pouted, complaining to Harrison. I told them I was going to be your new wife, but they totally ignored me. Harrison scoffed and pulled Chloe by the shoulder. Forget it. The pharmacists there have always been rigid. They are a bunch of gloomy women who probably got along great with Evelyn anyway. He was completely oblivious to the biochemical changes already beginning to wreak havoc inside his body just from missing one day of medication. I have my appointment with Dr. Sterling tomorrow. I will just tell him to switch my prescriptions to a different pharmacy. I am the patient. The hospital has an obligation to listen to what I want. Harrison felt entirely victorious. He had kicked out his nagging wife, secured a young, compliant mistress, and believed his life was about to become brighter than ever. He fully expected tomorrow's clinic visit to be just like all the others, a quick 5-minute chat and some small talk before heading out. But he still did not know. He did not know that the gloomy woman he discarded had acted as a massive fortress, shielding him from the brutally unforgiving reality of the American healthcare system. He did not know that by losing his medical proxy, he had stripped away his greatest armor, leaving him entirely exposed to a cold, merciless reality. The moment he opened the door to that exam room tomorrow afternoon, the castle of lies he had built would begin its spectacular collapse. After dinner, Harper dragged a small cardboard box out from the back of her closet. Mom, this is the stuff I threw in a box when you helped me move in. The box dropped onto the floor with a thud. It had old tape on it. It was full of my personal belongings that I had brought from my parents' house years ago, but had shoved into the back of a closet and forgotten about. Opening the box, I found old gardening books and scraps of patchwork fabric. Before I got married, I loved growing small herbs and flowers on the balcony. Spending my Sunday mornings watering them while smelling the wet soil was my ultimate stress relief. But after Harrison's illness was diagnosed, that time completely vanished. Dirt is filthy. If bugs get in here, it will affect my health. One day, Harrison casually threw my precious potted plants directly into the garbage bag. I could not say a word. I just quietly swept up the scattered soil with a broom. Since that day, I stopped growing flowers. Picking up the book, I smelled the scent of old paper. As I traced the cover with my fingertips, the smartphone I had placed on the table vibrated once. Looking at the screen, I saw a text message from my former sister-in-law, Brenda. Brenda was my age. She had always idolized her older brother as the pride of the family and constantly meddled in our household affairs. The screen displayed one short sentence. My brother is pitiful. Abandoning your sick husband, even though you are a nurse, makes you the lowest scum of the earth. The moment I saw those words, a sharp thorn pierced deep into my chest. More than being yelled at, more than being cursed out, that short sentence gouged my heart. Abandoning him, even though you are a nurse. Brenda knew absolutely nothing about how many sleepless nights I had endured, or how many thousands of pages of medical records I had written. 5 years ago, When Harrison suffered a massive attack in the middle of the night and was rushed to the ER, I called Brenda in absolute desperation. I begged her to sit with him at the hospital for just one night because I had an unmissable shift at my own hospital. But Brenda had snapped, "I am busy too. You are the medical professional. Figure it out yourself," and hung up on me. In the end, I had to bow my head, beg a coworker to cover my shift, and spend the night awake on a hard plastic chair in the waiting room. I placed my thumb over the text input box. "You do not understand anything. Try taking care of him for just one day before you talk to me." Countless retorts flooded my mind. My fingertips trembled slightly, but I deleted all the text. I quietly placed my smartphone face down on the table. "Mom?" Harper, noticing my change in demeanor, peered into my face with concern. "Was it Aunt Brenda?" I nodded slowly. Harper bit her lip and gently covered my face-down phone with her own hand. "You do not need to look at it. You do not ever have to listen to the words of those people again." The warmth of her hand transferred to my cold fingers. I realized that trying to make excuses and begging to be understood was what made it so painful. They never had any intention of understanding me from the very beginning. They just wanted to chain me down with convenient labels like wife and nurse, so they could protect their own comfortable lives. I let out a deep breath and smiled at Harper. "You are right. They have nothing to do with me anymore." I placed the gardening book next to the face-down phone. "Hey, Harper, do you want to go to the flower shop by the station tomorrow? I want to buy a small potted plant for this room." Harper's face lit up immediately. "Yeah, let's go. I have always wanted to try growing a cactus or something." Our laughter echoed in the small apartment. It was the clearest, purest sound I had heard in 22 years. Freed from the crushing pressure of carrying another person's life, I could finally take a small breath just for myself. No one could ever steal my flowers from me again. Brenda's cold words could no longer serve as the chains to bind me. I was completely, utterly free from that house. Meanwhile, the next morning, Harrison woke up in a terrible mood in his new condo. The clock had already passed 8:00 a.m. Normally, at this hour, a mathematically calculated low-sodium breakfast would be waiting on the table, alongside a precisely separated dosage of his morning pills. But the table in front of him was completely bare. "Chloe, is breakfast not ready?" Harrison called out toward the bedroom. A muffled voice replied from under the blankets. It's my day off from the med spa. Let me sleep." Chloe turned her back to the door, burying herself deeper under the covers. Harrison clicked his tongue and headed to the kitchen himself. He tried to pour a cup of coffee, but the hand holding the kettle trembled slightly. Ever since last night, he felt a disgusting, clammy sweat coating his palms. Just missing one day of medication cannot possibly ruin my health this quickly. He forced himself to believe that. Evelyn was always just exaggerating everything. Munching on a piece of cold toast, Harrison began preparing for his afternoon clinic appointment. He pulled his favorite designer jacket from the closet and adjusted his appearance in the mirror. He was supported by the arrogant belief that he was still a vibrant man who commanded respect in society. But as he went to put his things in his briefcase, he froze. He could not find his hospital ID card. Normally, his health insurance card, his patient assistance program card, and his hospital ID were neatly organized inside a blue zipper pouch resting on the entryway shelf. That pouch was managed entirely by Evelyn. Harrison aggressively yanked drawers open and shut until he finally dug an old, expired hospital ID out of his wallet. He had absolutely no idea where his insurance or subsidy paperwork was. Whatever. I am a legacy patient there. They will know who I am when they see my face. He shoved his wallet into his pocket and called out to Chloe in the bedroom. "Hey, Chloe, get up. We are going to the hospital this afternoon." Chloe sat up, groaning in dissatisfaction. The hospital is so boring. Let's go to that new cafe by the station after we're done." Harrison nodded in satisfaction. "Yeah, sounds good. My appointments always end in 5 minutes anyway." At this moment, Harrison was still completely clueless. He had no idea how much prep work and behind-the-scenes coordination Evelyn did with the doctors to ensure his appointments ended peacefully in 5 minutes. And he had no idea that the old hospital ID in his pocket would do absolutely nothing to shield him from the brutal reality beginning today. The daily life he had painted over with vanity was mere hours away from a catastrophic collapse. "Harrison, that jacket looks amazing on you." Chloe clapped her hands by the entryway mirror. Harrison smugly adjusted his collar, staring at his reflection. With his healthy complexion and tailored clothes, he looked nothing like a man harboring a deadly disease. He looked every bit the reliable, affluent executive. Well, you picked it out for me. Almost a waste to just wear it to the hospital. The two of them laughed together as they walked out of the condo building. Outside, a flawless blue sky stretched above them. For Harrison, it felt like the perfect beginning to a new life, finally throwing away the depressing baggage named Evelyn. However, as they began walking toward the subway station, Harrison felt a faint anomaly in his right leg. It felt heavier than usual, as if the strength required to push off the pavement was slightly draining away. It was the silent warning sign that missing his medication yesterday was already beginning to erode his nervous system. It is just my imagination. Probably drank a little too much wine last night. Harrison picked up his pace and pulled Chloe's slender shoulder closer. He firmly believed his sheer willpower could overpower the shadow of any illness. At the exact same time, I was sitting at the county clerk's office. In front of me were the forms for my change of address and separation of household. Your paperwork is fully processed. The female clerk politely handed me my new official residency documents. Only Harper's and my names were printed on them. The name Harrison Miller no longer existed in my household. The moment I accepted that single piece of paper, the final heavy knot deep in my shoulders dissolved. The realization that our legal ties were permanently severed bloomed in my chest as a quiet, profound joy. Leaving the clerk's office, I headed straight to the bank. I needed to reroute my hospital payroll deposits and transfer my entire personal savings out of the joint account we had opened when we first married, moving everything into an account solely in my name. The transfer is complete. Would you like us to destroy the old debit cards and checkbooks? The banker asked. I nodded quietly. Watching the old joint account cards get sucked into the industrial shredder, I let out a massive sigh of relief. Harrison had left the management of all our living expenses entirely to me. He probably had no idea how much money was auto-drafted from his account every month, or how much the utilities and premium insurance premiums cost. He likely did not even know his own rough account balance. From today onward, he would have to face his own bank statements. He would have to manage all of it by himself, including the astronomical payments for his specialized medical treatments. I slipped my new debit card into my purse and walked out of the bank. The sky was high, and my footsteps felt even lighter than yesterday. At 1:30 p.m., Harrison and Chloe arrived at the massive lobby of Chicago Memorial Hospital. As usual, he walked up to the automated check-in kiosk and inserted his old hospital ID. However, the screen flashed a bright red error message: insurance verification required at front desk. Harrison clicked his tongue at the soulless machine. So annoying. This screen never pops up. He left Chloe sitting in the waiting area and got in the long line for the main billing and reception desk. 15 minutes later, it was finally his turn. Mr. Miller, correct? Today we need to verify your primary insurance and request the original card for your copay assistance program, the billing clerk stated in a robotic, manual-driven voice. Irritated, Harrison pulled his insurance card out of his wallet and tossed it into the tray. This should be enough. I do not have whatever assistance card you are talking about today, he spoke dismissively. I have been a patient here for years. Just look at the records, you'll figure it out. The clerk's expression did not change. I apologize, sir, but if we cannot verify the original copay assistance card, your out-of-pocket responsibility for today's visit and pharmacy fulfillment will default to your standard deductible or self-pay rates. Harrison couldn't believe his ears. Self-pay? Do you have any idea how much my medications cost? It is a strict policy requirement. We cannot make exceptions. The clerk's cold voice drew the stares of surrounding patients. Harrison's face flushed red, and he hurriedly lowered his voice. All right, fine. I will bring it next time. Just process it normally for today. The clerk typed quietly on her keyboard and delivered another factual blow. Mr. Miller, your copay assistance authorization expires next week. Have you completed the renewal process? Renewal process? The words caught in Harrison's throat. He had absolutely no idea where those documents were, or how to even initiate the process. I will. Check on it later. Harrison practically fled the reception desk and hurried back to Chloe. Chloe looked up from her smartphone, her lips pouting in displeasure. You took forever. Why does checking in take so long? Just a minor glitch, Harrison bluffed, dropping heavily into the chair next to her. But as he stared at the printed routing slip in his hands, his fingertips were unnaturally cold. Until today, he had almost never experienced wait times at the hospital. That was because Evelyn always researched the peak hours in advance and booked the absolute smoothest time slots. While he sat on the comfortable lobby sofas, Evelyn was the one handling the tedious reception arguments, the insurance verifications, and the paperwork submissions. He believed his appointments only took 5 minutes, solely because Evelyn had been moving behind the scenes for over an hour before he even walked through the doors. Now, that invisible breakwater was gone. He was taking the freezing waves of reality directly to the face. An hour passed. Sitting on the hard bench outside the exam rooms, Chloe's mood had visibly soured. "Why haven't they called you yet? It is my day off." Her complaints grated on Harrison's nerves. "Just be patient. Big hospitals are always like this," he snapped back in a low voice, but his tone lacked its usual dominance. Perhaps because he had skipped his medication, his breathing was becoming noticeably shallow. The clammy sweat on his palms was getting worse. "Internal medicine. Harrison Miller. Please proceed to exam room 3. Finally, his name echoed from the overhead speaker. Harrison tried to stand up, but for a terrifying second, his knees almost buckled. He gripped the handrail tightly to support his weight, desperate to hide his weakness from Chloe. "Let's go, Chloe." He forced a fake smile and pushed open the heavy door to the exam room. But the atmosphere waiting for him inside was entirely different from the calm environment he was used to. Sitting behind the desk, Dr. Sterling's eyes pierced through him with an unprecedented, icy sharpness. And sitting dead center on the desk, like a terrifying warning citation, was the familiar worn-out blue medication logbook Evelyn had left behind. As Harrison pushed open the heavy exam room door, the noisy chatter of the waiting room was completely shut out. A faint smell of clinical antiseptic hung in the sterile white room. The cold air from the AC brushed against Harrison's flushed cheeks. Usually, Evelyn would walk in first, shake his hand and say, "Thank you for seeing us today." Harrison would follow behind her with a confident, leisurely stride. That was the familiar routine in this room. While Evelyn handled the detailed symptom reporting and paperwork submissions, Harrison only had to sit quietly with his arms crossed. But today, the person sitting next to Harrison was Chloe in her bright sundress. Sitting behind the desk, Dr. Sterling did not immediately look up when they entered. He kept his sharp gaze locked on his electronic medical record screen. Right next to his keyboard sat the familiar blue medication logbook. "Good afternoon, doctor." Harrison forced a bright, booming voice and dropped heavily into the plastic guest chair. Chloe sat next to him, giving a casual little bow like she was greeting a barista. "Nice to meet you. I will be accompanying him from now on." Harrison touched Chloe's shoulder with a satisfied smirk. "Actually, my wife and I finalized our divorce yesterday. She will be my support system going forward." He wanted to show off the fact that he was a winner who had claimed a new, exciting life. He wanted to flaunt the luxury of a man who had discarded his tedious middle-aged wife for a beautiful young partner. "She is young, but she is very capable. You don't need to worry about a thing." However, Dr. Sterling's expression did not shift an inch. He slowly raised his head, directing a freezing stare right at Harrison. "I see. Then let us get straight to the point." There were no words of congratulations, no reaction of surprise. Only a highly administrative, detached, and icy voice echoed in the room. Harrison felt slightly deflated but quickly recovered his composure. "Yes, please just prescribe my usual medications. I feel a little heavy today, but it's probably just fatigue." He deliberately downplayed his physical condition. He did not want to look like a severely ill patient in front of Chloe. He kept telling himself the nasty sweat on his palms since last night was just from lack of sleep. Without taking his eyes off the chart, Dr. Sterling asked flatly, "What time did you take your morning medications?" Harrison choked on his words for a second. "Well, actually, I did not take them this morning." "Why not? There was a mix-up at the pharmacy and we could not pick up the new batch." Harrison gave a light, dismissive laugh. "Well, missing one day is not a big deal, right?" The sound of Dr. Sterling typing instantly stopped. He let out a deep exhale and turned his ice-cold eyes entirely onto Harrison. "Mr. Miller, the medications you are taking are critically essential suppressants to stop the progression of your disease." The doctor's voice was laced with a quiet, undeniable fury. "I prescribe them down to the milligram, meticulously timing them to maintain a constant concentration in your bloodstream." The air in the exam room instantly snapped taut under Dr. Sterling's severe tone. To interrupt that regimen based on your own amateur judgment is absolutely inexcusable. Have you forgotten that doing so carries the risk of triggering a life-threatening, fatal cardiovascular attack? Chloe looked back and forth between Dr. Sterling and Harrison, her eyes wide with shock. "Doctor, you are exaggerating. I have lived with this disease for years, and I have never once collapsed from it." Harrison bluffed. But his own words were a betrayal of his past. 5 years ago, when he suffered a massive attack in the middle of the night and was rushed via ambulance, who was it that threw him in the car and desperately kept him alive until they reached this exact hospital? Doctor. Sterling quietly picked up the old medication logbook. He flipped through the pages and asked in a low voice, "Let me ask you this. After taking the new post-dinner medication I prescribed last week, what happened to the tremors in your right hand?" Harrison furrowed his brows. Tremors in my right hand? I never had any tremors to begin with. He firmly believed he had perfect control and awareness of his own body. But Dr. Sterling tapped a specific page in the logbook. "It is recorded right here in your ex-wife's handwriting." The doctor read the small print aloud. 30 minutes after dinner, slight tremors observed in the fingertips of the right hand. Subsides after 30 seconds, but has occurred for 3 consecutive days. Harrison was rendered speechless. He had not noticed those tiny changes himself at all. Evelyn had been continuously observing his every single movement, whether he was watching TV or eating dinner. "How about the midnight palpitations? 3 nights ago, you woke up slightly short of breath, didn't you?" Dr. Sterling's interrogation did not stop. It was just stuffy in the room. 2:15 a.m. Respiration shallow, cold sweat on forehead. Subsided after 5 minutes of back rubbing. This is also in the records. A drop of cold sweat slid down Harrison's spine, the symptoms he had dismissed as mere fatigue or a bad night's sleep. Evelyn had caught every single one of them and reported them as warning signs to the doctor. The only reason he thought he was healthy was because she was constantly racing ahead of him, crushing the seeds of a fatal crisis before they could bloom. Chloe shifted uncomfortably in the chair next to him. "Harrison, you never told me you had symptoms like that." Her voice completely lacked the light, cafe-going tone from earlier. "You told me it was basically just like taking vitamins." Harrison could not look Chloe in the eye. "No, Evelyn is just exaggerating things in her notes." He desperately piled on excuses. He wanted to maintain his vanity, to protect the illusion that he was a strong, untouchable man. But Dr. Sterling was ruthlessly clinical. He pulled a blank sheet of paper from his drawer and placed it on the desk. "By the way, regarding the renewal for your copay assistance program, the deadline is next week, but we have not yet received a request for the clinical evaluation forms." Harrison's eyes widened. "Renewal? What is that?" "If you do not utilize this program, the specialty medications for your disease will jump to thousands of dollars every single month." Dr. Sterling stated the facts dryly. "Your ex-wife always had every single document perfectly prepared and submitted to the financial office by this time every year." A terrifying silence enveloped the exam room. The only sound Harrison could hear was the rapid, panicked beating of his own heart. The heaviness in his legs, the clammy sweat on his palms, the expiring insurance paperwork, the unmanaged medications, none of it was from alcohol or fatigue. It was the undeniable beginning of his daily life, collapsing the moment his lifeline was cut. Dr. Sterling looked away from the medical chart and, for the first time, stared directly into Harrison's eyes. "I received a message from the main reception desk earlier. Doctor," Sterling's voice dropped an octave, "your ex-wife has officially requested to be removed from your emergency contact and medical proxy registration." Harrison gasped. "Well, we are divorced, so that is obvious. From now on, Chloe will." Before Harrison could finish his sentence, Dr. Sterling cut him off coldly. "No, you do not understand anything at all." Dr. Sterling quietly closed the file on his desk. The small thud echoed ominously in the room. "From this moment forward, your ex-wife will have absolutely zero involvement in your treatment. Let me explain to you exactly what that means." Harrison sat frozen in his chair. The freedom he thought he had won by stamping that divorce decree was, in reality, the act of severing his own lifeline with his own 2 hands. "From this moment forward, your ex-wife will have absolutely zero involvement in your treatment." Dr. Sterling's quiet declaration hung heavy in the cold air of the exam room. Harrison kept a faint, strained smile on his face, desperately trying to downplay the severity of what was happening. "No, I completely understand. That is why Chloe is here with me today. She will manage my medications from now on. There shouldn't be any issues." Harrison glanced at Chloe, seeking her agreement. But Chloe had been staring at the floor, refusing to meet Harrison's eyes. In her head, the vivid, terrifying records the doctor just read aloud midnight palpitations. Tremors were ringing like a blaring emergency siren. Dr. Sterling looked at Harrison's faint smile with absolute 0 degrees of sympathy. Mr. Miller, the disease you are fighting is not a simple condition where you just pop a pill and go about a normal life. The doctor tapped the thick blue binder sitting on his desk. It was the copied volume of the medical journals Evelyn had compiled over the years. Your ex-wife brought this notebook in without fail every single month. The doctor's voice held deep respect for a fellow medical caregiver, blended with a quiet contempt for the man sitting in front of him. Before I even had to ask, she had already organized the last 30 days of your subtle post-medication reactions, your daily dietary sodium intake, your sleep hours, and any pre-attack symptoms, and presented them to me perfectly. Harrison felt his throat go completely dry. That is just. She was being dramatic. I have been working a normal job and living a normal life. That is because I have my own physical stamina. You are entirely wrong. Dr. Sterling sharply cut down Harrison's delusion. The only reason you could live a normal life is because your ex-wife was strictly controlling every single aspect of your daily existence to match the progression of your disease. A horrifying silence dropped over the room. Doctor. Sterling continued with unforgiving facts. The fact that your ex-wife revoked her medical power of attorney means there is no longer anyone legally authorized to sign the consent forms for your specialty treatments. God forbid you suffer a massive attack in the middle of the night and are rushed to the ER in an unconscious state. There is no family member available to make immediate, life-saving decisions regarding your care. Harrison panicked and grabbed Chloe's shoulder. But Chloe is right here. All she has to do is sign. But doctor? Sterling slowly shook his head. Does your new partner possess the resolve and the medical knowledge required to do so? The doctor's sharp gaze shifted to Chloe. Miss Chloe, if Mr. Miller goes into respiratory distress in the middle of the night, can you make the precise judgment on exactly when to call 911? Chloe flinched violently. Can you accurately list his 5 current specialty medications, their exact dosages in milligrams, and his entire history of adverse side effects to the paramedics? Chloe was completely speechless. The life she had dreamed of was a glamorous lifestyle with a wealthy, affluent older man. She never signed up for the gritty, terrifying responsibility of trembling in the middle of the night listening to someone's irregular breathing and deciding whether to call an ambulance. I don't know any of that, Chloe squeezed out in a shaking voice. Harrison told me it was just like taking vitamins. Harrison's face turned bright red, and he glared at Chloe. You idiot! Keep your mouth shut. You can just learn it as we go. He was desperately trying to keep up his facade. He refused to admit that he was a severely ill patient who was fundamentally weak and incapable of surviving without someone else's exhaustive management. Dr. Sterling let out a deep sigh. He quietly closed the electronic medical chart on his monitor. The small click of the mouse was the absolute signal marking the beginning of the end for Harrison. Mr. Miller, we are done here, Dr. Sterling said in a thoroughly bureaucratic tone. I will issue today's prescriptions. However, if your copay assistance renewal is not processed in time, you will be billed out of pocket for the full retail cost starting next month. You will have to decide for yourself if you can afford to keep paying for these specialty drugs. Harrison opened his mouth to argue, but no voice came out. The doctor's cold eyes were no longer looking at him as a patient to be protected, but as a foolish man who chose to turn his back on reality. That same evening, I was walking back to the apartment with Harper, carrying the small potted plant we had just bought from the florist near the station. Just having a touch of green in our new living room made the air feel slightly warmer. As I started preparing dinner, my smartphone rang. The screen showed a call from Harrison's mother, Eleanor. I hesitated for a split second, took a quiet, deep breath, and answered. Hello? Evelyn? What on earth do you think you are doing? Eleanor's shrill, ear-piercing voice exploded through the speaker. Harrison told me everything. You packed up and left the house without permission? And you forced divorce papers on him? Eleanor's voice dripped with blatant rage and a patronizing tone that looked down on me entirely. My boy is suffering from a terrible illness, and you abandon him even though you are a nurse? Do you have no human decency at all? 22 years ago, Eleanor had clung to me in her hospital bed, crying and begging me not to abandon him. But somewhere along the line, she began treating my devotion as her absolute, God-given right. She convinced herself that the only reason her son was able to live a normal life despite his intractable disease was simply because her son was an exceptional, superior man. Evelyn, you are not exactly young anymore, you know? Eleanor continued, sounding triumphant. Harrison has a prestigious title. His salary is fantastic. Do you really think an average middle-aged woman like you can survive on her own after walking out of that house? I listened quietly to Eleanor's tirade. In the past, those words would have hurt me. I might have cried and argued back, saying, I am trying my absolute best. But right now, Eleanor's threats just sounded ridiculously comical. Eleanor, I started, my voice surprisingly calm and collected. It is certainly true that Harrison's title and salary are fantastic. Eleanor scoffed. Exactly. So apologize right now and go back home. If you do, I will put in a good word for you if I cut her off and stated the facts clearly. Do you have any idea how much he is going to have to pay in out-of-pocket medical expenses starting next month? I could sense Eleanor choking on her words over the line. Medical expenses? His insurance covers all of that. I traced my finger over the fresh stack of residency and financial documents I had just gotten from the county clerk. If he does not utilize the financial assistance programs and insurance overrides that I personally managed, the billing for his specialty infusions and diagnostic scans will hit over $10,000 every single month. I laid out the facts clinically. Until now, I sacrificed my own days off to run between the government offices, insurance brokers, and the hospital to handle the paperwork. But I am a stranger to him now. The renewal deadline is next week, and I guarantee he does not even know where the forms are located. WH. What are you talking about? Do you think those threats will work on me? Eleanor's voice began to tremble faintly. It is not a threat. It is reality. I took a sip of cold tea and let out a quiet breath. I have stepped down from my duty to support him. Please, you and his wonderful new wife can support your prestigious son from now on. Goodbye. I unilaterally hung up the phone and powered down the device. I would never allow a call from that family to connect to me ever again. From the corner of the room, Harper was watching me quietly. Mom, are you okay? I smiled gently and gave a small nod. Yes. I am not afraid of anything anymore. A solid, unshakable resolve had hardened in my heart. I hadn't just been passively enduring their abuse. I had been systematically finalizing every legal and administrative procedure for this exact day, preparing to hit them with the ruthless reality of just how much they depended on me as undeniable proof. The true meaning behind my silent departure was to hand down the ultimate punishment, a daily life without me. Meanwhile, Harrison stood frozen in the hospital corridor after leaving the exam room. Next to him, Chloe was glued to her smartphone, clearly trying to put physical distance between them. A nasty, sticky sweat clung to Harrison's palms. He still hadn't fully realized it. What he truly lost today was not just a medical proxy registration. It was the absolute, irreplaceable peace of mind that had fundamentally supported his life and existence, something he could never, ever get back. The trip back from the hospital to the new condo was dead silent. Harrison's footsteps through the evening streets were incredibly heavy, and an invisible, massive rift had opened up between him and Chloe. Entering the condo's living room, Harrison practically collapsed onto the sofa. Clutched in his hand was the receipt from the pharmacy. Printed on the paper was the total, $4,500. It was just a 1-month supply of his medications, paid for with his primary insurance but without the copay assistance override. Harrison stared at the number in absolute disbelief. Thanks to Evelyn handling the paperwork in the past, his out-of-pocket responsibility at the pharmacy counter had never been more than $40. Now it was $4,500. Furthermore, if he factored in the specialized blood panels and imaging tests he skipped today, his monthly expenses could easily exceed $10,000. Hey, Harrison, what are you going to do about this? Chloe demanded, her voice thick with displeasure. In her hand was a massive plastic bag she had brought back from the pharmacy. Inside were mountains of prescription bottles and blister packs. What do you mean? What am I going to do? I have to pay for it. I need these meds to live, Harrison snapped back, unable to hide his extreme irritation. But if you have to pay this much every month, we can't go on vacations. We can't even go out for nice dinners. Chloe's words carried no concern for his health. She was entirely panicked about her own lifestyle deteriorating. Harrison clicked his tongue and snatched the heavy pharmacy bag from Chloe's hand. He violently dumped the contents onto the coffee table. Post-breakfast, afternoon, post-dinner, right before bed, and as-needed rescue medications. The color-coded bottles and packets piled up like a mountain. Staring at the mountain of drugs, Harrison gasped. Normally, Evelyn had every single pill perfectly sorted into tiny individual compartments in a plastic organizer she bought at the dollar store. When he woke up, The exact pills he needed to take were already sitting next to a glass of water on the table. But right now, all he had in front of him was a soulless pile of plastic bottles. Harrison grabbed a bottle from the top and looked at the label. It only listed the complex pharmaceutical name and generic instructions. 3 massive questions erupted in Harrison's mind. Question 1. Which one of these pills am I supposed to take when the tremors in my right hand start? Dr. Sterling had pointed out his hand tremors earlier, but among this massive pile, Harrison had absolutely no idea which drug was meant to suppress those specific side effects. Evelyn used to adjust the timing of his doses based on his symptoms. Your hands are shaking a bit today, so take this one first, she would say, making the clinical judgment for him. Question 2. Where do I even request the copay assistance renewal forms due next week? And what do I need to prepare? Dr. Sterling's warning echoed in his skull. If he missed the renewal, his medical bills would permanently default to the astronomical out-of-pocket maximums. But Harrison didn't even know which government website to visit, let alone what financial documents were required aside from the doctor's clinical evaluation. He didn't even know where the front door to the process was. And question 3. If I start suffocating and have a massive attack tonight, who do I call? In the past, Evelyn would instantly wake up, rub his back, and make precise medical decisions. Should she call 911? Or should she administer a rescue inhaler and monitor him? Harrison didn't even possess the baseline criteria to make that judgment himself. With trembling hands, Harrison gripped a pill bottle and looked up at Chloe. Hey, Chloe. You heard the pharmacist's explanation today, right? How am I supposed to take all of this? Chloe grimaced and took a step back. I don't know. It was too complicated. I wasn't even listening. You weren't listening? You said you were going to support me. Harrison instinctively raised his voice. His anxiety and sheer terror mutated into rage directed at Chloe. That's just something people say, Chloe yelled right back, refusing to back down. I am not a registered nurse. I am not a caregiver. I work at a med spa. There is absolutely no way I can manage a mountain of drugs like this. Chloe's eyes were freezing cold as she looked down at him. The man she loved was an affluent executive who wore sharp suits and took her to luxury restaurants. Not an elderly, chronically ill patient spreading pill bottles on a table, terrified of an invisible threat. You were the one who said you'd be totally fine without your ex-wife. Manage your own damn disease. With that, Chloe turned her back, walked into the bedroom, and slammed the door shut. Harrison was left entirely alone in the living room with the mountain of medication. 3 questions no one could answer. It was a brutal, merciless reminder of exactly how massive Evelyn's existence truly was. At the exact same time, I was watering the small potted plant in Harper's apartment. I had placed the cute round-leafed houseplant right next to a small cactus. I listened quietly to the sound of the water soaking into the soil. Mom, what kind of plant is that? Harper asked, looking over her shoulder from the kitchen where she was prepping dinner. It's called a peperomia. They say it's very resilient and thrives even if the air is a little dry, I replied, gently wiping a drop of water off one of the leaves with my finger. This was not a high-wire act of keeping someone's life tethered to the earth. It was simply a peaceful moment, quietly watching a small life grow. Everything I had wanted for 22 years was right here in this tiny apartment. Dinner is ready, Harper called out. I stood up. On the table were a warm vegetable soup and grilled salmon with lemon herb butter. It was not a tasteless, zero-sodium hospital meal forced upon a patient. It was a normal, comforting dinner that smelled of butter and herbs. We sat across from each other and clasped our hands. Let's eat. The moment I took my first bite, it was so delicious it brought tears to my eyes. Being able to eat a meal cooked just for me, at my own pace, something so incredibly normal felt like an absolute miracle. After dinner, I unlocked my smartphone and opened the alarm app. Listed on the screen were over 10 meticulously scheduled alarms: morning, noon, evening, and the middle of the night. Every single one was set to manage Harrison's medication times and to check on his potential flare-ups. I quietly swiped left on every single one, deleting them. Delete, delete, delete. With every alarm that vanished from the screen, it felt as if one of the invisible chains binding me was snapping off. When I finished deleting the last one, the screen simply read, "No alarms set." I placed my phone on the table and watched a comedy show with Harper. Our laughter echoed in the room. No one was going to unreasonably scream at me ever again. My life belonged entirely to me now. Meanwhile, that same night, Harrison was huddled alone in the dimly lit living room. Chloe had locked herself in the bedroom and showed no signs of coming out. Harrison hadn't eaten dinner, but he was panicking because he knew he needed to take his evening meds. Staring at the handwritten notes in Evelyn's logbook, he couldn't figure out how to connect her instructions to his current symptoms. Patient does not show anxiety, but midnight palpitations are increasing. The moment he read that sentence, Harrison's heart violently skipped a beat. He suddenly felt like it was getting harder to breathe. His throat went dry, and a disgusting sweat erupted from his palms. Was this the precursor to a massive attack? Or was it just a panic attack brought on by fear? Harrison could not tell the difference. Evelyn. He muttered his ex-wife's name unconsciously. If she were here right now, she would rub his back, select the exact right rescue pill, and reassure him, "It's okay. It's just fatigue." But when he looked around, all he saw were cold walls. With trembling hands, Harrison grabbed a random pill and washed it down with water. He had no idea if it was the correct choice. He curled up on the sofa, forced to do nothing but wait for the sun to rise, biting down on the sheer terror of realizing exactly how heavy the lifeline he threw away truly was. But his despair had only just begun. The reality waiting for him the next day was far more ruthless. He was about to experience the true, catastrophic nightmare of having his medical proxy revoked in the unforgiving machinery of the healthcare system. Even if you are the patient calling, we cannot authorize an ER intake under your current file status. Hearing the robotic voice through the phone, Harrison couldn't believe his ears. It was 3:00 a.m. Harrison had woken up to a crushing, agonizing pain in the center of his chest. Desperate, he had dialed the overnight emergency triage line at Chicago Memorial Hospital. Cold sweat poured down his forehead, and every time he breathed, a sickening wheeze echoed in his throat. Why not? I have been a legacy patient there for years. Harrison tried to scream through his trembling voice, but only a hoarse croak came out. Mr. Miller, yesterday, your registered medical proxy officially filed the paperwork to revoke her status and HIPAA authorizations. The overnight triage nurse stated the facts with extreme bureaucratic detachment. Given the severity of your condition, if you are transported here, you may require immediate, high-risk specialized medications and emergency procedures. If you fall into an unconscious state, we have no legal proxy to authorize consent. The nurse's words echoed coldly in Harrison's skull. Until today, his wife was his emergency contact and the legally authorized proxy to approve his treatments. Currently, Mr. Miller, you have no registered family member to act as your guarantor. That is what revoking a medical proxy entails. In the treatment of life-threatening, complex diseases, hospitals are hyper-vigilant against massive liability risks. If there is no one to legally consent to high-risk, split-second decisions, they cannot blindly initiate critical procedures. I see in the notes that you have a new partner. Is she currently residing with you? Prompted by the nurse, Harrison dragged himself across the floor and pushed open the bedroom door. Hey, Chloe, wake up. But she was not there. The bed was unmade, and not a single one of her belongings remained in the room. The closet was half empty, leaving only the faint, sweet smell of her perfume hanging in the air. Sitting on the nightstand was a small piece of paper. I can't do this. Goodbye. Harrison crushed the piece of paper in his fist. Confronted with the gruesome reality of an incurable disease and the sight of an older man suffering in the middle of the night, she had bolted without a second thought. All she ever loved was the illusion of a healthy, affluent executive. There's no one here? Harrison answered in absolute despair. The triage nurse lowered her tone slightly. First, please dial 911. You will have to follow the instructions of the paramedics for your transport destination. However, I cannot guarantee our facility will accept the transfer. The line went dead. Harrison collapsed onto the cold floor of his dim living room, forced to just lay there and wait for his breathing to stabilize. How utterly powerless he was. How incapable he was of surviving without someone else propping him up. The reality of his existence pierced through his entire body, along with the freezing chill of the floorboards. By early afternoon, after his attack had somewhat subsided, Harrison clung to a final thread of hope and called social worker Ramirez. He was desperate for help regarding his insurance renewals due next week. But Ramirez's words pushed him further off the cliff. Mr. Miller, you must obtain your tax returns, proof of residency, and the clinical evaluation forms from Dr. Sterling. Ramirez's voice carried none of the warm, supportive empathy she used to offer. You must physically take those documents to the county health department and your insurance broker yourself. The deadline is next Wednesday. Harrison held his head in his hands. You can't just tell me that. I am in no condition to walk outside right now. Can't someone else go do it for me? If the patient cannot physically move, a legally designated proxy or family member must do it, Ramirez replied flatly. In the past, your ex-wife sacrificed her own days off from work to run between all these offices. We were only able to process everything smoothly because of her incredible, devoted labor. Harrison lost his words. Evelyn did all this every single year without uttering a single complaint? While he spat insults at her, claiming it was her duty, she was expending an unimaginable amount of energy protecting his life and his finances behind the scenes. We medical staff can only guide you through the systems. We cannot act as your surrogate to run your personal life. Ramirez's words shattered the very foundation of Harrison's arrogance. Mr. Miller, the one person you truly needed to be thanking this whole time was never the hospital and never the insurance system. It was your ex-wife. After the call ended, Harrison broke down sobbing loudly, but there was no one left to rub his back. At that exact moment, I was sitting in a small, quiet coffee shop far away from the university hospital. In front of me sat a few documents prepared by my attorney. With this, the division of assets and pension separation is completely finalized. The rightful, legally mandated amount from your joint accounts has been wired directly to your personal account. Hearing my lawyer's calm voice, I bowed my head deeply. Thank you so much. Thanks to you, I can safely begin my new life. I took a sip of hot black tea. The fog in my heart had completely cleared, leaving behind an unbelievably serene peace. You made an incredibly wise decision, Evelyn, the lawyer said, slipping the documents back into his briefcase. Given his condition, your ex-husband is going to require severe, round-the-clock care very soon. If you had stayed married out of a misplaced sense of guilt, you would have been legally and financially bound to him as his caregiver for the rest of your life. You would have lost everything. I stared out the window at the people walking by. I didn't just walk away silently and sign the divorce papers without fighting for alimony because I was running away. It was the most calculating, quiet, and foolproof defense mechanism to sever all legal ties to him permanently. I rushed the paperwork while he was drunk on the illusion of his new affair, ensuring that by the time he realized the truth, he would be legally incapable of dragging me down with him. That was my final decision after 22 years of being treated like an unpaid medical servant. Mom, all done? The cafe door opened, and Harper walked in with a bright smile. Yes, just finished. Thank you for waiting. The two of us walked side by side down the local shopping street, buying groceries for dinner, laughing over silly, trivial things. A beautifully normal, mundane daily life that I now cherished more than anything else in the world. That night, Harrison was huddled alone in his empty condo. Whether it was a side effect of the wrong pills or the progression of his disease, his body would not stop shaking. With trembling hands, he opened the old medication logbook Evelyn had left behind. He was desperate to find even the smallest clue on what he should be taking. As he flipped through the pages, a loose slip of paper fluttered out. It was a memo Evelyn had prepared to hand to Dr. Sterling at the next appointment. Written in her meticulous handwriting was the following. Patient is completely unaware, but new symptoms have begun surfacing this week. I suspect this is the sign that the disease is progressing to its next stage. Harrison gasped for air. Progressing to the next stage. It was a cruel reality he never wanted to know, and a reality he absolutely could not handle alone. The only reason he could pretend to be a strong man was because Evelyn absorbed all of that terror by herself, shielding him so he would never have to face it. Harrison's eyes fell on the existence of the blue binder underneath that memo. It was the original copy of the true medical records Evelyn had maintained for 22 years, the definitive stack of evidence he would have to face at Dr. Sterling's office tomorrow. This is the true record of your life, Doctor. Sterling's low voice echoed in the dead silence of the exam room. Sitting in the center of the desk was the thick blue binder. It was the original 22-year journal that Evelyn had mailed to the clinic yesterday. The next afternoon, Harrison had practically crawled his way to the university hospital waiting room. Chloe was nowhere to be found. After leaving that note last night, she had vanished entirely. With no family to rely on and no one to call, Harrison took a cab alone to get here. Every time he breathed, a sickening wheeze rattled deep in his chest. He couldn't even walk straight without clinging to the handrails in the hallway. Sitting in the waiting room chairs, looking around, Harrison finally realized something. A wife pushing a wheelchair, a daughter holding a stack of insurance papers guiding her father. Everywhere he looked, there were patients desperately clinging to life with the physical support of someone who loved them. Until today, Harrison had looked down on these people. I am not like those sick invalids. I walk on my own 2 feet. I am a strong, successful man in society. But that was only because Evelyn carried the entire crushing weight on her back, hiding the reality of his illness from his line of sight. Thrown out into the open with nothing to protect him, Harrison was the most pathetic, powerless person in that entire waiting room. When his name was called and he entered the exam room, his face was the color of ash. Dr. Sterling did not look surprised to see him in this state. He knew exactly what happened to a patient when their medication management collapsed and panic set in. "Mr. Miller, what happened?" The doctor's bureaucratic question made Harrison's lips tremble. She ran away. Once she found out how heavy my illness actually was, he tried to laugh self-deprecatingly, but his facial muscles merely twitched. "Doctor?" Sterling didn't say a word. He just placed his hand on the blue binder on his desk. "Your ex-wife entrusted me with the original copy of this." The doctor slowly opened the cover. The edges of the binder were frayed from years of use, the pages bulging with sticky notes. "Mr. Miller, you honestly believed you were suppressing your disease through your own sheer willpower and physical strength, didn't you?" Dr. Sterling's eyes reflected an unforgiving truth. "But if you look at this record, you will see just how comically delusional that was." The doctor opened to a specific page, records from 10 years ago. "This was right around the time you were promoted to VP of sales and were flying all over the country." Harrison caught his breath. Back then, he bragged that he could cure his illness with guts and came home drunk almost every night. He wanted to prove to everyone, and to Evelyn, that he was a strong, untouchable man. Severe palpitations and extreme sweating observed. Patient insists it is just the alcohol, but it is clearly a side effect. Starting tomorrow, reduce sodium in his breakfast to 0 and delay his morning meds by 30 minutes to observe. That is your ex-wife's meticulous handwriting, doctor. Sterling read aloud. In order to protect his pride, I must heavily disguise the lack of salt using herbal broths, so he does not realize he is on a strict sodium restriction. Harrison froze in his chair. The meals he used to complain about, shouting, "This food tastes completely bland." Evelyn had stayed up all night, researching recipes and boiling broths for hours just to hide the fact that she was actively saving his life through his diet. Records from 5 years ago. Doctor. Sterling ruthlessly flipped the page. The night you were rushed to the ER. The next morning, you laughed it off, saying, "It's just overwork. I'll be fine after a nap." Disgusting sweat dripped down Harrison's forehead. Explanation from the doctor. Patient was 1 step away from a fatal cardiovascular event. Because the patient is incapable of accepting reality, I will relay the severity of his condition to him gradually. I will protect him, so he does not fall into despair. I will absolutely protect him. The moment he saw those words, a sharp, piercing pain like a spike being driven into his chest ripped through Harrison. Evelyn understood all of it. His vanity, his arrogance, his fake bravado, she accepted all of it. She understood his pathetic, hidden terror of the disease better than anyone, and she willingly dragged herself through the mud to protect him so he could continue living inside his illusion of being a strong man. "Mr. Miller." Dr. Sterling closed the binder. The sound carried the heavy weight of entirely negating Harrison's past existence. "You were never fighting your illness." The doctor's words sliced through the freezing air of the exam room. "The one fighting your illness was your wife. You were simply living inside a sterilized bubble she built for you, mistaking yourself for someone strong." Harrison covered his face with both hands. "Nursing me is your duty. You're an RN. You're used to it." The countless insults he had hurled at her were now flying back at him like a barrage of terrifying, poisoned arrows. What he had joyfully thrown away for the sake of his freedom was not just a wife. He had thrown away his very own life. "And I have one more piece of brutal news for you." Dr. Sterling looked down at the latest lab results in front of him. Just as Evelyn's memo predicted last night, a definitive change Harrison hadn't noticed was ravaging his body. "Your disease has progressed to the next stage." Harrison jerked his head up. "The next stage? Until now, you were able to manage at home exclusively because you had 2-4-hour intensive monitoring by your ex-wife." "Doctor," Sterling delivered the verdict without a shred of sympathy, "but you no longer have a caregiver. Skipping your medications or abandoning your dietary restrictions will result in immediate, fatal consequences. At-home care living alone is no longer an option for you. Harrison's vision went completely black. Then, what am I supposed to do? You must be admitted to an inpatient facility. The doctor paused. However, the beds at Chicago Memorial are strictly reserved for critical acute patients. We cannot accept a long-term admission for a patient who has absolutely zero family support. You will have to find a transfer hospital or enter a specialized skilled nursing facility. Skilled nursing facility. The words struck Harrison's skull like a sledgehammer. Just a few days ago, he believed he was embarking on a glamorous new life with his young mistress, celebrating his ultimate freedom. Now, he was a lonely, aging, severely ill man, abandoned by his family, destined to be institutionalized. And the absolute sole cause of it all was his own unparalleled arrogance. In order to initiate transfer protocols or facility placement, we require a legally authorized guarantor. Dr. Sterling moved on to the administrative facts. Is there any relative you can contact? Relative. The face of his sister Brenda flashed in Harrison's mind. But he knew better than anyone that she would never take care of him. She had only bought into his fake persona, using him as bragging rights for having a successful older brother. There was only one person left. Harrison's trembling hand gripped the smartphone in his pocket. His daughter, Harper. There was no way she would ever forgive a father who kicked out her mother and flaunted a mistress. But right now, Harrison had literally nothing else to cling to. I will call my daughter. Squeezing the words out of his hoarse throat, Harrison dragged himself out of the exam room. Stepping into the hallway, the chatter of the other patients sounded like events from a completely different universe. Collapsing onto a bench in the hospital courtyard, Harrison unlocked his smartphone screen. Staring at the name Harper, tears of absolute regret overflowed from his eyes. But those tears would do absolutely nothing to save him. With a trembling finger, he pressed the call button. The ringing tone echoed emptily in the quiet courtyard. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. The terror that she might never pick up made his heart hammer violently. Then, after the 4th ring, the call connected. Hello? The voice that came through the speaker was his daughter's, freezing cold and utterly quiet. Harrison had no idea just how brutally the final lifeline he tried to grab was about to reject him. Hello? The voice coming through the phone was shockingly icy and calm. Harrison shivered in the cold courtyard wind and pressed the phone tighter against his ear. Harper, it's Dad. I'm at the hospital right now, and… Harrison had no idea how to start. The absolute authority he used to wield as the patriarch of the house was completely gone. I know Mom left. And actually, Chloe left me today too. Harrison tried to play the victim, softening his voice. The hospital is telling me I am in trouble because I don't have a legal guarantor. Harper, could you make some time and just… Are you asking me to become Mom's replacement? Harper's freezing voice cut him off. Her tone wasn't filled with anger, but with absolute, profound disgust. No, that's not it. I just need you to sign some paperwork. And just help with a few administrative things. Dad, you really don't understand anything at all, do you? Harper let out a small, tired sigh. Did you really think I didn't know about Mom's blue binder? Harrison's heart leapt into his throat. Did you think I didn't know how Mom used to stay up terrified, rubbing your back every time your breathing got weird in the middle of the night? Every single word Harper spoke slammed into Harrison's chest like a heavy stone. You always bragged about being a strong man. You called her nursing a duty and never thanked her once. Harrison lost his words. His daughter had been watching him the entire time. Watching her father strut around the house acting important, while her mother exhausted her body and soul to keep him alive behind the scenes. You weren't fighting an illness, Dad. You were just being protected by Mom. It was the exact same brutal truth, Doctor. Sterling had just handed him in the exam room. Harper, please. You're the only one I have left. Harrison finally threw away his remaining pride and practically begged. But Harper's resolve was unbreakable. I never want Mom to be sacrificed for you ever again. And I am absolutely not going to throw away my own life just to protect your vanity. It was a quiet, absolute rejection. Do not ever contact us again. The call cut off with a soulless electronic beep. Harrison slumped forward on the courtyard bench. The trust and love of his own daughter, he had spent years actively destroying that too. With shaking fingers, Harrison scrolled through his contacts one last time. The only person left was his sister, Brenda. Maybe she would still look up to him as her successful older brother and bail him out. Clinging to his last shred of hope, he hit dial. "Oh, Harrison. What's wrong? Rare to hear from you." After a few rings, Brenda's cheerful voice echoed. Harrison quickly explained the situation. He finalized the divorce with Evelyn, his mistress ran away, and the hospital was forcing him into a skilled nursing facility, meaning he desperately needed a legal guarantor. Evelyn divorced you? What a cold-hearted bitch. At first, Brenda feigned indignation, taking Harrison's side. Abandoning my sick brother? Unbelievable. I'll give her a piece of my mind. No, I can't even reach Evelyn anymore, Harrison panicked. More importantly, Brenda, please, will you be my guarantor? The facility won't take me without a family member's signature. The moment she heard those words, the air on the other end of the line went unnaturally freezing. Guarantor? Hold on a second, Harrison. The cheerful tone completely vanished from Brenda's voice. My copay assistance expired, so my meds alone might cost $10,000 a month. Plus, someone needs to manage the pill schedule and be the emergency contact for flare-ups. I can't do it alone. When Harrison laid out the honest truth, Brenda let out a blatant groan of disgust. Are you kidding me? I have my own life to live. I can't afford to pay thousands of dollars for you. I'll pay it out of my savings. I just need you to sign the paperwork and be the emergency contact. No way. I'm not dealing with getting woken up by hospital phone calls in the middle of the night. Brenda's words were the exact brutal reality Harrison had forced Evelyn to endure for decades. Besides, this is all your fault for treating Evelyn like garbage, isn't it? Harrison couldn't believe his ears. You were the one always bad-mouthing Evelyn. You called her a useless wife. I only said that because you kept saying it, so I was just agreeing with you. Brenda snapped back without a shred of guilt. Look, I'm really busy right now, so I gotta go. Figure it out yourself. The call abruptly disconnected, and the screen went black. Harrison was now completely, utterly alone. The only reason the people around him had ever treated him like a respectable man wasn't because he had inherent value. It was because Evelyn had shielded him from all the messy, dirty, heavy responsibilities, hiding them from the world. The armor of vanity he had worn so proudly shattered into dust the moment Evelyn vanished. All that remained was a sick, powerless, aging man that nobody wanted to take responsibility for. At that exact same time, I was sitting in Harper's apartment drinking a hot cup of tea after dinner. A comedy show played on the TV, filling the room with bright laughter. Suddenly, my smartphone buzzed on the table. The screen displayed an unsaved number. I kept my eyes on the screen and took a sip of tea. I didn't need to answer it to know who was calling. It was probably Brenda. Harrison must have begged her for help, and now she was calling to try and force all the responsibility back onto me. In the past, I would have answered the phone trembling, forced to endure her unreasonable rage, but I simply swiped the screen and tapped block caller. What's wrong, Mom? Harper asked, looking curious. Oh, nothing, just a spam call. I smiled and turned my eyes back to the TV. No one from that family would ever threaten my daily life ever again. I had completely reclaimed my own life, the safest place in the world. By the time night had fully fallen, Harrison dragged his heavy feet back into his new condo. He unlocked the door, but not a single sound greeted him. The dark living room was freezing, the air stagnant. On the coffee table, the mountain of pill bottles he had violently dumped the night before sat exactly as he left them. There was no dinner waiting for him. There was no one to ask him how he was feeling. Harrison collapsed onto the sofa. Every time he took a breath, a sickening pain flared in his chest, and the tremors in his right hand were far worse than yesterday. With shaking fingers, he tried to gather the scattered pill bottles. But he still had no idea what to take, when to take it, or how much to take. His lifeline had been severed by his own hands a long time ago. Staring at the brutal truth hidden behind his ego, Harrison could do nothing but tremble in the encroaching terror of the night. In the dark, silent room, the only thing he could rely on was about to emit a merciless sound. Beep, beep, it is time for your medication. The robotic electronic alarm echoed through the pitch-black living room. It was 9:00 p.m. The medication alarm set on Harrison's smartphone. It was one of the countless alarms Evelyn had obsessively set so he would never miss a dose. Harrison stayed curled on the sofa, picking up his smartphone with trembling hands. The screen read, Bedtime meds. If palpitations occur, add rescue inhaler, pills. But sitting right in front of him was an untouched mountain of pharmacy bottles. He had no idea which bottle was his bedtime med and which one was the rescue pill. Reading the back of the bottles only gave him complex pharmaceutical names. He had no idea how to match them to his current symptoms. His breathing grew ragged, and his heart violently hammered against his ribs in an irregular rhythm. Harrison ripped open a blister pack and grabbed a white tablet. Just as he brought it to his mouth with a glass of water, Dr. Sterling's icy warning flashed in his mind. Interrupting or altering this regimen based on your own amateur judgment carries the risk of triggering a fatal cardiovascular attack. Harrison froze. What if this was the wrong pill? What if this single tablet was the one that placed a fatal burden on his already weakened heart? Absolute terror surged through his veins. Harrison spat the half-dissolved pill out onto the carpet. Gasp. Wheeze. It hurts. And, help me. Somebody pick the right pill for me. Staring at the white tablet dissolving on the floor, Harrison realized he was completely checkmated. Money and status could not save him now. What he desperately needed was an absolute ally, someone who understood his life better than he did, and managed it for free, without asking for anything in return. And he had thrown away that one and only ally, calling her a burden. Harrison crawled across the floor, desperately grabbing his smartphone. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Evelyn's name. There was no pride or vanity left. Begging her was the only path left to survive. He hit the call button, and a long ringtone echoed. She might not answer. She probably blocked me. The sweat of pure despair poured down Harrison's face. But after the fifth ring, the call connected. Yes? It was Evelyn's voice, incredibly calm and unnervingly quiet. "Evelyn, it's me! Please help me!" Harrison screamed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, hoarse sob. "I don't know what pills to take. I don't know what to do about the hospital tomorrow. I don't know anything. Chloe left me." The other end of the line was dead silent. She didn't sound angry. She didn't sound panicked. It was just silence. "I was wrong. I'm so sorry I said taking care of me was your duty. Just please come back. I can't survive without you," Harrison bawled, begging for forgiveness. After a long pause, Evelyn spoke in a hauntingly gentle voice. "I never abandoned you." That single sentence made Harrison's breathing stop. "For 22 years, no matter how much you refused to thank me, no matter how many times you called it my duty, I never once abandoned you to your illness." Evelyn's voice was crystal clear. "But you abandoned me as your wife a very long time ago, didn't you?" Harrison could not argue back. To protect his delusion of being a strong man fighting a disease, he had ignored her suffering and chased after a younger woman. That past now stood before him as an impenetrable, towering wall. "If you need medical support, please consult the hospital's social workers or a local care facility. All the information you need is written in that blue binder," Evelyn said, delivering her absolute final goodbye. "But I will no longer include my life in your treatment plan. Goodbye, Harrison." Beep, beep, beep. The soulless dial tone echoed in the room. Still holding the phone to his ear, Harrison let out a voiceless scream. Evelyn hadn't taken revenge. She had simply returned the responsibilities she was carrying back to their rightful owner. Take responsibility for your own life. That entirely obvious reality was a hell far worse than any punishment for Harrison. At that moment, I stepped out onto the balcony of Harper's apartment, letting the night breeze wash over me. Even after hanging up the phone, my hands were not shaking. I felt no anger, no sadness, and no triumphant joy of victory. All I felt was the profound relief of having finally finished an incredibly exhausting, decades-long shift. "Mom, you'll catch a cold." Harper gently draped a cardigan over my shoulders. I turned to her and smiled softly. "Thank you. But somehow, I don't feel cold at all." A beautiful half-moon hung in the sky. I could imagine exactly how much he was suffering in that condo right now. If I went to him, I could easily save him. But I will never move again. If I saved him, he would simply misunderstand and think, "She came back because I am a man of value," and I would instantly revert to being a convenient machine meant to keep him alive. I completely let go of his hand so that I could finally live my own life. The next morning, Harrison was found collapsed on the floor of his condo by the building manager. The manager had come knocking regarding a payment issue and noticed something was wrong through a cracked window. An ambulance was called, but when the paramedics arrived, the scene was sheer chaos. Harrison was fading in and out of consciousness, completely unable to name the medications he was taking. The coffee table was just a scattered mess of unopened pill bottles. When they asked for an emergency contact, he deliriously muttered over and over, "There's no one." Finding a receiving hospital proved incredibly difficult. A patient with a rare complex disease, an unknown treatment history, and absolutely zero family members available to authorize consent. Inside the blaring ambulance, fading into darkness, Harrison could only think of one thing. When Evelyn was here, this never happened. Even when he had a massive attack, she had everything prepped, gave precise instructions to the paramedics, and the hospital admitted him instantly. That flawlessly smooth daily life was an absolute miracle she had been orchestrating behind the scenes. How could I have been so incredibly stupid? Intoxicated by his freedom, he had kicked out the zookeeper who kept him safe inside the cage and threw himself unarmed into a wilderness full of wild beasts. The sound of the ambulance siren faded away. Harrison's vision slowly sank into pitch-black darkness. He finally realized, paying with his own life, that the nagging wife he had looked down on for 22 years was, in reality, his absolute, unquestionable God. Harrison's vision slowly began to focus. An unfamiliar, slightly yellowed white ceiling. The sharp, cheap smell of generic hospital antiseptic. From the bed next to him, he heard the heavy, wet coughing of a stranger. This was not the pristine, quiet private suite at Chicago Memorial Hospital he was used to. It was a cramped, noisy six-bed ward in a public hospital, separated only by thin curtains. Multiple IV lines were hooked into his arms, and a dull pain shot through him when he tried to move. "You're awake?" A young, exhausted-looking doctor ripped back the curtain and peered down at him. It was a face he didn't recognize. Not a polite, accommodating attending physician like Dr. Sterling, who treated him with VIP care. "Where am I?" Harrison rasped. "County General ER. You were brought in last night after your building manager called 911. The young doctor didn't look up from his tablet, answering in a monotone voice. "You barely made it. Because you skipped your specialty meds. You were one step away from complete cardiac failure." The doctor's words sent a chill down Harrison's spine. "Transfer me to Chicago Memorial. I am a legacy patient there." Harrison desperately tried to project authority, but his voice had no power. The young doctor shot him a freezing glare. "Impossible. We contacted Chicago Memorial, but they refused the transfer because you have no